It was their last scheduled debate.
From WGEM News, this is a Decision 2018 special report, the Illinois Gubernatorial debate. Here is our moderator, WGEM's Gene Kennedy.
Good evening, and thank you so much for being with us tonight. We are coming to you live from inside the Quincy Community Theater here at the Oakley Lindsay Center in downtown Quincy. This debate is produced by WGEM News. We have also partnered with the Illinois Broadcasters Association to distribute this event to television and radio stations across the state. Tonight's participants, Republican incumbent Governor Bruce Rauner, also Democratic challenger J.B. Pritzker. This is the only downstate debate scheduled to be televised, and so with that in mind, we have panelists from several downstate regions, all representing news organizations that are owned and operated by Quincy Media Incorporated. Joining me tonight to ask the questions, my colleague Natalie Will from WGEM News, also Caitlin Canute of WEEK TV in Peoria, Doug Wilson with the Herald Whig in Quincy, James Stratton from WREX TV in Rockford, and Bobby Oler with the Heart of Illinois ABC in Peoria. So let's get now to the ground rules. These are agreed to by both campaigns. The candidates will be asked questions on an alternating basis. The candidate who's asked a question has 2 minutes to answer, and then the other candidate has 1 minute for a rebuttal. First, though, each candidate has 90 seconds for their opening statements, and per the coin toss, Governor Rauner, we will begin with you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. This election for Illinois governor is one of the most important elections in Illinois history. For decades, our state has been going down the road of corruption, tax hikes, job losses, and a failed political system run out of Chicago's corrupt political machine. Today, we stand at the turning point for our state. Today, I'm asking for your vote so we can continue the work to save our state and turn our state around. We've made progress in our first term, growing jobs, 210,000 new jobs, and the endorsement of every job creation state organization in the state. Historic education funding and transformational education new funding formula. Medicaid reform, saving $500 million in fraud and $2 billion in making us the nation's leader in mental health services. An adoption tax credit for families who adopt in the state of Illinois. And the Future Energy Jobs Act, making Illinois a national leader in energy jobs and energy conservation, and many more accomplishments in our first 4 years. But we have so much more to do. We need to get term limits and fair maps done. We need to get regulatory relief to grow even more jobs, and we need to get property tax reductions by getting mandate relief. That's what's at stake. We can't go back to higher taxes. We can't get more corruption through gerrymandered districts. We need to fight for the future. That's why I'm asking for your vote.
Governor, thank you. Mr. Pritzker, you have 90 seconds for an opening statement.
Thank you. I'm J.B. Pritzker, and I've spent my life bringing people together to solve problems and to get big things done. For more than 20 years, I've been a national leader in early childhood education, fighting for universal preschool and quality childcare. And I founded 1871, the small business incubator right here in Illinois that's now considered the best in the world because we've created thousands of jobs and hundreds of companies. And I led the building of a museum that teaches more than 120,000 kids and adults every year to fight against bigotry, hatred, and intolerance. I'm running for governor because the gridlock and dysfunction in Springfield has caused real damage to working families across our state. I know that we can get big things done for Illinois. That's why I've put forward real plans for expanding and lowering the cost of health care, for bringing back vocational training into our high schools, to make college more affordable, to balance the budget of the state, to raise wages and create jobs. I'll be a governor for you, whether you're a farmer in Macoupin County or a small business person in Peoria or a nurse or a teacher right here in Quincy. I'm J.B. Pritzker, and it's time that we put Springfield back on the side of working families.
All right, Mr. Pritzker, thank you so much. Let's get right now to the questions. Governor Rauner, the first question is for you, and it comes from my colleague Natalie Will at WGEM News.
Thank you, Gene. Governor Rauner, 2 weeks, a grand jury is scheduled to hear evidence presented by the Attorney General's office alleging that your administration is criminally responsible for the way it handled the Legionnaire's outbreak at the Veterans Home in Quincy. This comes after multiple families have filed lawsuits alleging your administration knew about the problem before taking necessary actions that could have saved lives. The recent release of public documents appear to show knowledge of the issue before families or the public were notified. Governor, do you still maintain that your administration handled this correctly?
Our veterans are our heroes. I have spent my life supporting our veterans and working for their betterment. The tragedy of the Legionella infection for our veterans here in Quincy was a terrible tragedy. It's heartbreaking. And to the families here tonight and the families across Illinois who lost loved ones, I am sorry for your loss. It is deeply painful. And I pledge to you that we will continue to do everything we can to keep our veterans safe. The team here in Quincy is an excellent team. The staff is dedicated. They love the veterans. This home is, in effect, an extended family. And the veterans love this home. The Legionella infection occurred immediately the first day. Action was taken to keep the veterans safe. Water supplies were shut off, windows were closed, fountains were shut down, bathtubs drained and no longer used. And the veterans were evaluated for their health condition. Those who were infected were treated promptly. Everyone else was monitored, and the families of those veterans who showed some symptoms were notified immediately when a change in the health condition of their loved ones. No one's perfect. In retrospect, we could all learn lessons about how to do things better, but the veterans were well served by the outstanding staff here. Action was taken immediately to keep them safe, and now we're going the extra step because it's clear that we can never completely eliminate the bacteria from these ancient pipes. Now we are replacing all the plumbing, all the facilities, so our veterans have one of the most modern, efficient, effective facilities anywhere in the United States of America. Our veterans deserve the very best. I think that much of this so-called criminal investigation is a political ploy to divert attention from the tax fraud that Mr. Pritzker has engaged in, and I believe it's shameful abuse of power by the Attorney General.
Mr. Pritzker, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, actions were not taken immediately. In fact, 6 days went by, and as a result, people got sick and someone died. And then over the course of 3 years, the neglect and fatal mismanagement led to 14 deaths and 70 people getting sick, including the veterans and their family members and people who worked at the facility. Look, Governor Rauner tried to blame this on Senator Tammy Duckworth. He tried to blame it on the weather. I believe that we have to stand up for our veterans. My father was a Navy veteran, my grandfather a Navy veteran. It's our obligation to defend our veterans and keep them safe. That's not something that Governor Rauner did. And as a result of his failures and his fatal mismanagement, he's now under a criminal probe, as is his administration. It's a shameful neglect of our veterans who we should be standing up for every single day.
Mr. Pritzker, I have a question for you. I want to stay with the Vets Home issue just for a moment here. The governor has pledged to keep the Veterans Home here in Quincy, to rebuild it, to make it safer. There are plans already in the works that are underway with that right now. Can you, though, commit on this stage tonight that you will keep the Veterans Home here in Quincy because it is crucial to jobs and to the economy here?
Absolutely. I believe that this Quincy Veterans Home needs to be rebuilt, and I will commit myself to finishing the job of keeping our veterans safe right here in Quincy. But I just want to remind you that it took the governor 3 years to finally do something to keep those vets safe, to actually move them out of the facility, to begin the process of building a new facility. Frankly, I don't know why it took so long. Everybody knew for a long time that something needed to be done, and he did virtually nothing.
Governor, do you have anything? You have 1 minute to respond to that.
I do indeed. This statement by Mr. Pritzker is a politicization of the suffering of our veterans. It is wrong. It is shameful. There is no evidence, not a shred of evidence, of any criminal action or criminal behavior by anyone involved with the Quincy's Veterans Home or our administration. And there have been countless hours of testimony, hundreds and hundreds of emails reviewed, not a shred of criminal evidence. The reason this is being brought up and called a criminal probe is simply for one reason. The 24 hours before Lisa Madigan announced this probe, Mr. Pritzker was determined to have committed a scheme to defraud the taxpayers of Illinois by a Democrat in Cook County government who did a multi-month investigation of Mr. Pritzker and determined that Mr. Pritzker engaged in tax fraud, mail fraud, and perjury. So his allies in government quickly created a sham investigation, calling it criminal to cover up his actual criminal behavior of stealing $330,000 from the hardworking men and women of the state of Illinois.
We have another question for you, Governor. It comes from Caitlin Canute with WEK-TV.
Well, since you touched upon that very issue, talking about the allegations from the Cook County Inspector General, you've likened Mr. Pritzker to, I believe the quote is, a bank robber who steals money, but then is still a bank robber. Do you feel that's a fair comparison? And is there a way that you think voters could still trust Mr. Pritzker considering these allegations?
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
The voters can in no way trust Mr. Pritzker on any issue. He's demonstrated a complete lack of integrity, ethics, and character. He is not worthy of elective office in the state of Illinois. And yes, a bank robber that gets caught and returns the money is still a bank robber. Mr. Pritzker has returned the $330,000 that he stole from every taxpayer in the state of Illinois because he knows it was wrong. But that in no way reduces the seriousness of his crime. These are serious white-collar crimes. People have gone to prison for far less than Mr. Pritzker has committed.
Just ridiculous.
Simple fact is, 4 of my 9 predecessors as governor went to jail. Mr. Pritzker has a very good chance of being number 5. The people of Illinois,
that's ridiculous.
The people of Illinois
let him finish.
deserve better than this.
Please no applause. Go ahead, Governor, finish your thoughts.
The people of Illinois deserve better than this. Mr. Pritzker lied, committed perjury, according to investigation of a Democrat in Cook County government. He can't be trusted on taxes. He keeps his money in offshore accounts in the Bahamas. He inherited billions, never worked an honest day in his life, inherited billions, and doesn't pay his taxes on it. This is wrong. He tried to use an inheritance to buy office from Governor Rod Blagojevich before he went to prison. He was caught on FBI wiretap trying to buy the Senate seat or the Treasurer's office. This person does not deserve to hold the highest office in the state of Illinois or any elected office. And to add insult to injury, he was caught using the language of racist, referring to elected officials in Illinois, calling black elected officials What did he call him?
I'll leave that to you.
Offensive.
All right. Your time is up here, Governor. There's a lot here.
May I respond?
Yeah, there's a lot
Governor?
here. Go ahead. Feel free to respond. You have 1 minute.
If I may, this is, first of all, you've just heard a desperate rant by a failed governor who is in the final hours of his campaign and his governorship.
Please, folks, please, let's hold the applause. If we could hold the applause.
To be clear, you're likely to hear more of that tonight because he's got nothing else, just lies and excuses. Now, I want to respond to the question. This was an internal memo that was leaked for political purposes. There was an article about the fact that this was leaked for political purposes by someone associated with Governor Rauner. And the report that was issued was actually a report about the problems in the tax assessor's office. And I believe there are real challenges in our property tax system that we need to address. But as for the renovation project that was underway, it was halted because it was unclear whether the home would be sold or rented out. and then the project was restarted. All the taxes that were assessed were paid. But this is Governor Rauner trying to distract from his own record. 22 property tax reassessments he sought, and illegally sought 3 homestead exemptions, and then he wants to raise property taxes on $1 billion.
Mr. Pritzker, thank you so much.
$1 billion on the people of the state of Illinois.
We've got to move on to a question from my colleague here, Doug Wilson with the Herald's Way. Go ahead, Doug.
Mr. Pritzker, both you and the governor have talked about the billions of dollars it's going to take to heal the state finances, also the billions of dollars that are needed to recover, to take care of capital projects such as roads and bridges. So far, we don't have details, very many details from either of you. Can you tell us where that money is going to come from? Please give us details. Please show us the math. Where will the money come from?
Sure. Let's talk about all the things that are required to balance a budget, because it surely requires both revenues and expenditures, and looking at both of those, bringing down expenditures in state government and bringing up some revenue. And then, very importantly, in order to raise revenue, growing the economy is the best way to do that. So let's talk about some of the things that we can do. First of all, we can lower expenditures in the state of Illinois because we need to invest in early childhood education, which lowers the cost of our K-12 education system by preparing kids better for K-12. That's been proven in state after state over the last 40 years. We also can invest in prevention, something that Governor Rauner has cut, prevention of people who are on Medicaid getting, for example, type 2 diabetes, or HIV testing, which he cut severely because of the 736 days without a budget. And then finally, how do you grow the state of our economy in Illinois? Well, you need to create jobs. Under Governor Rauner, he's created fewer jobs in his term in office in the same term, in the same time period as his predecessor, fewer jobs, and he called his predecessor a miserable failure at job creation. So let's create jobs. Let's look at revenue. I have proposed that we legalize marijuana. I think we can bring in $700 million by doing that. We can also accomplish a lot in our criminal justice system by doing that, making it safe for people. We also should look at sports betting in the state. You talked about infrastructure. Governor Rauner proposed that he was going to put forward an infrastructure bill during his term in office when he ran 4 years ago. He didn't do that. He never did that. We do need an infrastructure bill. It's been almost 10 years since we had one. We should look at the good ideas that come from Republicans, too, about how to pay for that. For example, expanding gaming in the state and making sure that we've got sports betting. Those are good ideas that come from the Republican leader in the Illinois Senate.
But any math that you can commit to in regards to that?
Yeah, well, I'm suggesting to you that we need to look at all three of these things. When you're balancing a budget, it's not just that one thing is associated with an expenditure, one tax is associated with an expenditure. You have to look at it holistically, and that's why efficiencies and lowering the cost of government while you're looking at bringing in revenues by growing the economy. And I put forward a real plan for growing the economy, for helping small businesses get started all across the state, and particularly here in downstate Illinois. It's critically important that we help people by investing in infrastructure, that we allow them to start businesses with a small business loan program, and that we invest in the kinds of things that raise up, including higher education, which Governor Rauner has cut severely and has proposed a 30% cut in.
All right, Mr. Pritzker, thank you. So, Governor, you have 1 minute to respond. Infrastructure.
Doug, I've been endorsed by every organization of job creators in the state of Illinois because we have a plan to grow the economy. We grow the economy 210,000 jobs in my term. In the prior 12 years of one-party rule with Blagojevich, Quinn, and Madigan, we only grew 60,000 jobs.
There was a great recession.
We grow jobs by cutting taxes, not raising them the way Mr. Pritzker wants to do. We grow jobs by cutting the regulatory burden on our businesses, not putting in more regulations as his ally, Mr. Madigan, has done for decades. And the way to fund infrastructure, as I've proposed very clearly, is public-private partnerships, a balanced budget that prioritizes infrastructure, more money from the federal government, and I've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government to fund transportation infrastructure. And what's been crystal clear, I've talked to hundreds of companies around the state who've said, Governor, we're here because you won. We're here because you're fighting for us. If Mr. Pritzker got in and raised taxes as he's promised, we're leaving the state. And there'll be a flood of businesses leaving the state with his tax plans on income taxes and the vehicle miles driving tax that he's proposed.
Just false.
All right, Governor, there's another question for you, and it comes from James Stratton, who's with WREX.
Governor, you kind of touched on a question I was going to ask, actually. Nearly 10,000 people left Winnebago County in the last 6 years. Many of them moved across the border to Wisconsin. You can easily do so and then come back to Rockford for work. It's happening across our state, but most people who are leaving Winnebago County specifically are under the age of 44, prime working age, over half of them. This is a problem happening across our state. As a leader, how do you keep people in our state, keep young people in our state, and possibly grow our state?
That's exactly the core issue. That's why I ran for governor. We have been having people leave Illinois for decades. If it weren't for immigration, both legal and illegal, from outside the country, Illinois would be down over 1 million people. People who can choose what state to live in are choosing other states. The #1 state they're leaving for is Indiana. They're not going there for the weather. They're going there because the taxes are lower and the regulations are more reasonable, and the manufacturing sector there is booming compared to Illinois. And to add insult to injury, those states have changed their regulations and they're growing their union jobs faster than the state of Illinois. In Indiana, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, we are hostile on taxes and regulations, and Mr. Pritzker's plan, and he's laid it out, a graduated income tax with $11 billion of new spending that's been documented by independent sources, documented. $11 billion in new spending, new taxes will crush the middle class, crush job creators. They will flood out, and the sound of that flood will not be the sound of toilets being flushed. It'll be the sound of businesses getting flushed down the drain in this state of Illinois. We need to cut the taxes, reform our state government, and reduce the regulatory burden on our businesses, and end the corruption that Mr. Pritzker is part of. He has funded Blagojevich, he has funded Madigan, he's part of the Chicago political machine that has been destroying our state for decades. He's cheated on his property taxes. He's been caught by a fellow Democrat, not a Republican, a Democrat who caught him in the cheating. And he says, well, it was leaked. It doesn't matter what was leaked where. It doesn't, that's irrelevant. What matters is the substance of the report. It was written by a Democrat after months of investigation, and what he did determine? Tax fraud, mail fraud, perjury, likely indictment in the next few months. And what a tragedy for the people of Illinois if that indictment would come after this election. We deserve better than this, not tax hikes, not more corruption, more economic growth.
All right, Mr. Pritzker, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you very much. The governor wants to talk about corruption, so let's talk about corruption. It's the height of corruption when you put your personal and your business and your political interests above the interests of the people of the state of Illinois. He covered up the fatal mismanagement at the Quincy Veterans Home. He was unwilling to close the company that he owned that now emits a gas that causes cancer. He's done virtually nothing to deal with the neglect of children at DCFS. And then there was this terrible abuse and neglect of seniors at nursing homes that he owned. That is the height of corruption. I think you want a governor who stands up for the people of Illinois, who thinks about their safety and security. This governor has put his own interests above the safety of people all across the state.
All right, next question comes to us from Bobby Oler from HOI News in Peoria.
Mr. Pritzker, you have proposed a so-called fair tax solution for our state, and I have seen you put the tap dancing shoes on for this question, and I'm going to ask you specifically tonight. A teacher in Peoria, my city, makes an average of $51,481. Under your plan, how much would this teacher pay to the state of Illinois in income tax?
That teacher ought to get a tax break. In fact, people in the middle class and those striving to get there should get a tax break.
So
and
less
those
than 5%?
At the very top, 4.95% is where this governor has spent, by the way. That's
so this
the
teacher
tax
will go
that
lower.
he's spent. And we ought to ask people like Governor Rauner and me and the wealthiest people in the state to pay more. Look, here's the point of a fair tax system. The point of it is that we want to lower property taxes across the state, pay for our schools differently, because that's causing a lot of the property tax increases that people are feeling. And we want to lower taxes on the middle class and those striving to get there, because people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're the first ones who are going to be able to spend that money on something that's good for them and good for the economy of the state of Illinois if they spend that money.
But why not give a rate?
Lower taxes for most people.
Why not give a rate? We didn't get a rate in the first forum. We didn't get a rate in the ABC 7 debate.
Because
this is your chance tonight, the last debate. Can you give us a rate?
Well, let me tell you this. We want to make sure that we're negotiating it with the people in the legislature, members of the House and the Senate who are representatives of the people. And then, and this is important, in order to get this done, it's got to go to a referendum of the people of Illinois. So, look, this is going to be negotiated. I want to have Republicans and Democrats at the table to help us determine what the rates are.
No ballpark, so voters have an idea
Whatever
before they vote.
Whatever we do, it's got to be good for the middle class. We've got to make sure that we're creating jobs. Remember, the vast majority of states in the United States have a fair tax system, a progressive income tax system, and they're doing much better than we are. We're in the bottom third of job creation under this governor. We can do so much better, and those states are also taking care of their pension issues too. The federal government has a fair tax system. 32 states in the United States that have income taxes have a fair tax system. We can lower property taxes in the state and lower taxes for the middle class with this idea.
Governor, go ahead. You have 1 minute to respond.
Mr. Pritzker dodges questions like he dodges his taxes. Here's a simple fact. Mr. Pritzker won't answer this question because he knows the answer is the middle class is going to get crushed. The middle class will get crushed under his plan. He has proposed almost $11 billion in new spending, let alone what we are already spending in the state of Illinois. It was confirmed by an independent source and written about in the Champaign News-Gazette. You can't have $11 billion and put it only on rich
Governor, you're just
people in
not
the state.
telling the truth.
The middle class will get crushed, and his Democratic allies in the General Assembly actually slipped up and made a little bit of a mistake. They put out proposed tax rates for a graduated income tax 2 years ago. And you know what? Somebody making $40,000 middle class income pays 6 1/4 under that
That's
plan.
just not something
Mr.
I
Pritzker
accept.
doesn't want to talk about that.
Not something I accept, Governor. And once
yes,
again,
yours
you're
will be
lying.
higher than
All right,
that.
gentlemen, we need to move on. That's time. We need to move on. I want to get back to my colleague Natalie Will. She has another question, I believe, for the governor.
Yes. According to the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture is Illinois' #1 industry, contributing nearly $9 billion a year to the state's economy. The Illinois Farm Bureau estimates Illinois farmers could lose $420 million due to changes in federal trade policy. How would you work to protect Illinois farmers?
I am a strong advocate for Illinois farmers. I come from a farm family. My grandparents were dairy farmers and corn farmers, lived in a little double-wide trailer. They taught me my work ethic. I didn't have any inheritance at all, but they taught me how to work hard. And I've made my own fortune in life working for teachers and law enforcement officers, and have done a great job earning my way the whole way. Our farmers get hurt by tariff wars. I've been to the White House 3 times to discuss tariffs and tariff issues with the President and the administration, as well as members of Congress. But that said, I support the efforts to change the unfair trade deals that have been taking away jobs in America. For years, other nations have been taking advantage of American jobs, hurting our union workers, hurting our factory workers, and our farm workers with unfair trade deals. I applaud the administration's effort to change those unfair trade deals. But while that is happening, I'm working with them to try to bring down the tariff impacts on our farmers. I've been a lifelong advocate for farm families, and I've done many important things for our farmers. Gotten them more education funding for small and rural districts in the new education funding formula. I've gotten a harvest emergency signed so that our farmers can get their products to market much more efficiently and effectively. I worked with them on very advanced soil and water conservation in our districts to protect our resources on our farms. And I've made sure that the state is reducing the regulatory burden and supporting our farmers in their growth so that they can lead the world in exports around the globe. We're making good progress for our farmers, but our farmers are tied to the land. They can't leave. They're here. And Mr. Pritzker and his ally, Mr. Madigan, the Chicago political machine of Pritzker, Madigan, and Blagojevich, they care nothing about farmers. They care about the city of Chicago and their plans to raise taxes and gerrymander our districts again after the 2020 census will devastate our farmers, and we can't let that happen.
Mr. Pritzker, you have 1 minute to respond, sir.
Well, it's hard to call out all the lies in that last soliloquy, but let's talk about the million people that are employed in our agriculture economy in the state of Illinois. We need to protect them. And when Donald Trump and the administration initiates a trade war that hurts our soybean farmers, that hurts our livestock farmers, you want a governor who's going to stand up and call it out, who's going to go to our federal officials and ask them to call it out. I want to point out to all of you that in the 4 years that the governor has been in office, he has not once called Senator Dick Durbin to ask him to do anything for the people of the state of Illinois. Not once. Not once. You want a governor who's actually going to go to our federal officials and ask them to fight for the farmers of Illinois. Our soybean farmers are being harmed. You know, when you lose a customer in China, for example, under this trade war, it's very hard to get a customer back, very hard. And so people in Illinois are being harmed by this trade war. You want a governor who's going to stand up for them and make sure that jobs are not lost in our agriculture economy.
All right, Mr. Pritzker, thank you so much. Caitlin Canute has a question.
Mr. Pritzker, you've said that one of your priorities is fixing a broken education system. So I have an education question, but this comes from a student, an 8th grader, Patrick Huber from Parkview Middle School in Creve Coeur, Illinois, sent me this. He wanted me to ask you, both of you really, what will you do for students of Central Illinois? He says, will you make sure some of the state's money goes back to Illinois public schools? Now, the reason this matters to Mr. Huber, this young man, this 13-year-old, he says, most hot days we struggle to stay cool in my school because there is no air conditioning in most of my classrooms. So again, we know that funding education is a problem. How will you find that money, and can you commit to Central Illinois schools as well as all of the schools throughout the state of Illinois, all of the Patricks out there?
It's such an excellent question. Let's talk about this. Look, funding for schools in Illinois is done the wrong way. In Illinois, about 25% of the funding for public schools comes from the state, and the vast majority of the rest of it comes from the property tax system, local property taxes. Now, in the average state in the United States, about half of the funding for public education comes from the state and half from property taxes. So that's why our property taxes are so high across the state of Illinois. That's why we need a fair tax system to lower local property taxes, which are driving people. You asked about out-migration. It's driving people out of the state. Having a better funded and higher quality education system is critical for us and for our economy. The governor stands foursquare against making a fairer tax system in the state because he benefits from the flat tax system. We have a very unfair tax system. In fact, we have the most unfair tax system in the nation. It's been called out that way. That's why we need to make changes in that system. And to the question, a funding formula change was made in the state over the objections of the governor. He likes to take credit for that, but actually it was State Senator Andy Manar that led the effort to get a formula change. That formula is a good change, but it only works if we actually fund our schools properly. I believe that every child in Illinois deserves a quality education, no matter the color of their skin, the income level of their parents, or the zip code that they live in. We've got to invest in that education, including in our community colleges too, and we've got to bring back vocational training into our high schools so that kids can get jobs without going to college and make college more affordable. Those are all things that we can get accomplished by changing the way we fund schools and lowering local property taxes.
Governor, you have 1 minute to respond to that question.
Caitlin, education funding is simply the most important thing we do together as a community. I ran for governor to have the best schools in America and the strongest, fastest growing economy, and we're making progress on both. Truth is, in the 10 years before I became governor, we had one-party rule dominated by Mike Madigan along with Blagojevich and Quinn. In that 10 years, state support for education was cut 4 times in the prior 10 years. We were one of the worst states for state support for local education. I ran for governor to fix that. And this baloney about Andy Manar, he was in the Senate then. He did it. He was part of the failure of that. I became governor. I created a bipartisan task force. We now have $1.4 billion more every year from the state to our local schools, record funding. And we have a new education funding formula that's more equitable.
That happened in spite of you, not because of you, Governor.
I led, Mr. Pritzker, and it could have happened at any time prior to my governorship.
In spite of you.
And you know what? If you're going to interrupt, be careful about the perjury, Mr. Pritzker.
Listen, you both know the rules.
To finish the point, we have a funding formula that my team led on a bipartisan basis that got more money for rural districts, small districts, and low-income districts, and is much more equitable based upon the evidence. This was great progress.
Not true.
All right, I believe Doug Wilson has the next question.
Governor, the Mid-America Port, which owns land just a few miles south of here, was promised more than $1 million under Governor Pat Quinn's administration. This was part of an economic development program. Is there any chance that money, which would deal with a project that could bring in $94 million a year, is there any chance that money could be unfrozen?
The answer is yes. Infrastructure is the other priority after education with taxpayer dollars. Speaker Madigan has blocked a infrastructure bill for 4 years because he wants to have the political message of failure. The reality is Speaker Madigan had a supermajority, could have passed a capital bill. He chose not to. I've recommended one. Just as for 2 years we had a budget impasse, Speaker Madigan had a supermajority all during that time. He could have passed any budget he wanted. He refused because he wanted to create crisis and lay blame elsewhere. What I've recommended is a record capital bill. I want the biggest capital bill in Illinois history, not funded by tax increases like Mr. Pritzker wants, not an income tax hike, not a vehicle miles tax like he's recommending.
I have not.
Through 4 sources: balanced budget, where infrastructure is prioritized, more money from the federal government, and I can deliver that by working with the federal government, and Mr. Pritzker can't. Yeah, number 3, public-private partnerships, and we have investors lined up to invest in ports, rail systems, airports, and our highways, and also by expanding gaming in the state of Illinois. Right now, I don't like to gamble. I don't particularly believe in it, but you know what? Many citizens in Illinois like to gamble, and we are losing hundreds of millions and billions of value because our citizens are going out of state to Wisconsin, to Indiana and other states to gamble. We should keep them here, and we can have billions of dollars in new financing to put together the biggest capital bill in Illinois history with no new taxes, with strong economic growth. We combine infrastructure spending with continued spending in K-12 schools, and I will get record funding for higher education in my first year of my second term. We will have a booming economy, strong economic growth, the best education system in America, and then if we use our university system to drive technology and innovation with the University of Illinois' incredible computer science and engineering school, partnering with our local communities, Peoria, Rockford, and other communities, we will be on a track to balanced budgets and tax reductions, not tax hikes like Mr. Pritzker is proposing.
Mr. Pritzker, you have 1 minute.
Well, the governor made all of these promises 4 years ago. He's living in a state of denial. The rest of us are living in the state of Illinois. We went 736 days without a budget. There was $16 billion of a bill backlog that he built up. $1 billion wasted in late payment fees that are owed because of his intransigent. 8 credit downgrades for the state, just under this governor. 8 credit downgrades to the worst credit rating in the United States. And he's the biggest deficit spender in the history of the state of Illinois, and 5 of our universities fell to junk credit status. He's been a failed governor. If you want economic development, look to me, because I have put forward a real plan for job creation, for making sure that we're attracting businesses, not driving them away by bad-mouthing the state, and investing in infrastructure. Those are all things that will be good for creating jobs right here in Adams County and across western Illinois.
All right, James.
I want to stay on the topic. I want to stay on the topic of infrastructure. This question goes to you, Mr. Pritzker. In 2010, then Governor Quinn made the promise in Rockford and possibly other areas across the state, that rail was coming to Rockford and rail was expanding in the state. He made the same promise in 2014. He made that same promise, and others did, through other cities as well, the Quad Cities being one of them. If elected, how do you work to bring rail across the state to then expand jobs and grow areas like Rockford, like the Quad Cities, and in other areas downstate?
Well, a commitment to invest in infrastructure means that you've also got to go to the federal government and get them in as a partner. And again, if you have a governor who's not actually reaching out to the leadership in our delegation in Washington, D.C., you can't get the dollars to get this done. We need to invest in infrastructure in our transportation system. Remember, we're the supply chain hub of the nation. You have to invest in that, in our roads and bridges and waterways. By the way, we also need to invest in high-speed broadband everywhere in the state of Illinois. That's an infrastructure project we all ought to get behind. But without federal dollars and without a real commitment to an infrastructure bill, we can't get it done. It's time for a change. He's a failed governor. You want somebody who's actually going to get things done.
Mr. Rauner, you have 1 minute to respond.
The good news for the people of Illinois is that Mr. Pritzker has failed to hide his tax fraud from the Inspector General. He has failed to hide the truth about his income tax hike, and he has failed the ethics of the state of Illinois.
Just desperate.
This person, he talked about getting big things done. It'll be big spending, big tax hikes, and big corruption by empowering Speaker Madigan. This is devastation for the state. Simple fact is, we need to lower the tax burden on the people of Illinois, not raise it. We need to help our small businesses grow by reducing their regulatory burden, and we need to restore the confidence in our government by getting term limits done and fair maps done. Mr. Pritzker's ally, Mr. Madigan, has blocked term limits, has blocked fair maps, and he blocked balanced budgets for years to create a crisis that Mr. Pritzker likes to run around and say is responsible for other places other than Speaker Madigan's supermajority. We need to change the system of the Chicago political machine. That's what I'm fighting to do, and we can't give up. We can't stop and say, let's give more power to the corrupt Chicago crowd and just raise taxes. That will devastate the state. We got to keep working and keep trying.
Governor, thank you. Bobby Oler has a question right now.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit now to safety, specifically gun violence. It's not just a Chicago problem. We deal with it all the time, downstate, specifically in Peoria. The most recent numbers go through July, and we have had more murders by gunfire through the month of July this year than any year since 2006. And federal agents, as well as Peoria police, broke up a gang known as Bomb Squad, made 15 arrests for the second time this decade in the city of Peoria. My question to you, Governor, is why is this still a problem, and what will you do in a second term to fix it?
The largest driver of violence in our neighborhoods is unemployment. There is lack of economic opportunity, and this has been true for decades. The violence in Chicago was just as bad, actually worse 20 years ago. It goes in cycles because of massive unemployment. Our labor regulations, our taxes, our restrictions on our businesses, our workers' comp system full of fraud and abuse. Businesses have been leaving the state. They stayed, many of them, because I ran and because I won, and many of those businesses have said, we're growing in Illinois, Governor, because of you, but if Mr. Pritzker got in and raised taxes, we're gone. We can't tax our way out of this problem. We need businesses growing in the neighborhoods. And as I made crystal clear the other day, we have a problem of illegal immigration in the state of Illinois that's part of this issue. Mr. Pritzker has publicly said he supports sanctuary cities. I do not. Mr. Pritzker has said there's no person that's illegal. The reality is we have an illegal immigration problem in the state of Illinois.
These are human beings. They're not illegal.
And Mr. Pritzker, illegal immigration takes jobs away from union members, factory workers, farm workers, holds down American wages. We need to enforce our immigration laws. We need comprehensive immigration reform to support legal immigration folks coming here with their skills that help our economy grow, but to end illegal immigration. And to do that, we need E-Verify for all of the employers in the state, and we need to increase the penalty for employers who break the law and hire illegals rather than Americans. You'll see in Chicago, if it wasn't a sanctuary city with hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants, more jobs for the citizens of Chicago and higher wages for the citizens of Chicago and a better future. And violence gets driven by unemployment. Immigrants don't particularly do violence themselves, as I was misrepresented the other day, but then when they take jobs from Americans, unemployment contributes to violence, and we've got to end that.
Mr. Pritzker, you have 1 minute.
We agree. The governor and I agree on one thing, and that is we needed to pass and sign a trust act, which he did, and I agree with that. But let's deal with the gun violence question that was asked. We have a real gun violence issue all across the state of Illinois. It's not just in Chicago, as you pointed out, here in Quincy, in Rockford, in Springfield. Let's ask the question, why has it gotten so much worse over the last 2 to 3 years? One of the biggest reasons is because when you don't pass a budget, guess what happens? When you're unwilling to compromise and pass a budget, mental health services are cut, substance abuse treatment, jobs programs for our youth are cut. He talks about jobs. People also need the escalator, the ability to get to a job, and that means investing in the skills training that people need to get those jobs and making sure that we've got violence interruption services. When they cut them in Springfield, when they cut the budget because of Governor Rauner, guess what happened in Springfield when that program was cut? Violence took off. We need to address the core issue of jobs, and we need to address the core issue of a budget, because those are the things that people need, and we can avoid gun violence.
All right, Mr. Pritzker, thank you. We turn our attention now to Natalie Will, who has a question, I believe, for Mr. Pritzker.
We've been touching on jobs several times. You both mentioned it in your opening statements. Mr. Pritzker, we are in a tri-state region tonight where Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa all meet. Like other border cities in the state, Quincy does have to compete with other states to lure new businesses and to keep the ones that are here existing. What is your plan to make Illinois appealing for businesses?
Well, first of all, let's remember that every state around Illinois, virtually every state, has a fair tax system. And they also have lower property taxes. We need to lower property taxes in the state by implementing a fair tax system. That will do a lot to help us attract businesses and to keep people here in the state of Illinois. Let me add one more thing, which is, we have a great higher education system in the state, but under Governor Rauner, he's driven 72,000 students away from Illinois colleges and universities. And many of those kids that leave the state, 70% of them don't come back. So if you want to know what's causing out migration, it's property taxes, and it's the challenge of kids leaving the state because the governor has cut funding for higher education by 20% and proposed another 30%. Look, we want in-migration to the state. We want people from other states to move here, and that means, frankly, having a changed tax system that lowers local property taxes will help attract people, and helping the middle class in our state will make this a much more attractive place for people to come. Finally, you need a jobs plan, and I put out a real jobs plan that includes a small business loan program, technical assistance, and mentorship, because 2/3 of all the jobs that get created in our economy here in the state of Illinois are jobs created by people who start businesses and grow small businesses. That's hard work. A governor and a government should stand up for our small businesses because they're the big job creators. You also need a governor who's not bad-mouthing the state every day, so big businesses don't want to come, because who wants to come to a state where the governor is saying horrible things about the state every day? And add to that, he invited governors from the surrounding states to go on TV and bad-mouth the state, and then he goes abroad and can't help himself. He's trying to attract people to the state, but he bad-mouths the state there too. I'm going to be your best chief marketing officer for the state because it's the people of the state of Illinois, the talented people, that are the most attractive thing about our state.
Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
There's a reason that I have been endorsed by every organization of job creators. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, which is what all the small businesses are members of, they've endorsed my re-election. The Illinois Chamber of Commerce, the Illinois Manufacturers Association, the Associated Builders and Contractors, they've all endorsed me. Why? I'm fighting for them to create jobs, lower taxes, less regulation, more economic opportunity. And they are petrified of Mr. Pritzker. He has said repeatedly tonight he's going to get big things done, and he will. Big spending, big taxes, big support for corruption in the Chicago political machine. And they are petrified of Mr. Pritzker and his crowd, Mr. Madigan and Blagojevich and the whole crowd that Mr. Pritzker has funded for years.
They're petrified of the instability that you brought to the state.
Here's what we need to do. Stop the corruption with term limits and fair maps, stop the tax hikes by getting pension reform, health care reform, and unfunded mandate relief, and lower the taxes, and the jobs will flood back into the state at a rapid pace.
Kaylin Canute.
Governor Rauner, with the state facing $130 billion in unfunded pension liability, do you think we need further pension reform if reelected? What would that look like in your next term? Specifically, how do we achieve that sort of reform while still protecting the wages of hardworking Illinois residents?
Yes. The answer is yes. We need pension reform, and it needs to be fair and constitutional. We need to protect the pensions of retirees. We need to protect the pension benefits that have been earned through today by our government employees. And we need to create options for them for the future that are more flexible and more affordable and give them choices. It's called a consideration model. It was put forward by some of the Democrats in the General Assembly back 6-7 years ago. It was supported by many of the unions then, and I support that sort of a structure. As a compromise to get things started, I recommended that we do a consideration model along the lines that many Democrats recommended. We tie certain pay packages and certain wage increases to certain pension structures and give employees choices, not coerced choices, free choices that are reasonable trade-offs of pension value versus today's pay value. And we can save billions of dollars annually at the state level combined with the local level with that sort of pension reform. We combine that with health care reform and regulatory relief for businesses. We can have balanced budgets with no new taxes, as Mr. Pritzker has proposed. We can do it through fair reform that saves money and gives more options to our hardworking state employees.
All right, Mr. Pritzker, you have 1 minute to respond to that.
Well, under Governor Rauner, the pension liabilities increased by $15 billion, and it's continuing on the wrong path. Look, he made a proposal late last year that I think everybody needs to be aware of, and that's to bankrupt the state of Illinois. That was actually his proposal at the federal level to deal with the pension issue. Bankrupt the state of Illinois. Think about what that would do. It would cost the taxpayers of Illinois billions of dollars for decades to come, because we would have an even worse credit rating in the state, and we would pay incredibly high interest rates. The fact is that we do need to deal with our pension challenge in the state, and that means we've already partially dealt with it with a Tier 2 system that's bent the cost curve. But remember, the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois has ruled that we have to pay the pensions that are owed. And it's a moral obligation. People took jobs with a promise of a pension. We owe them that pension. We should step up to the plate. And there are plans and proposals out there that we should be looking at to actually pay them. One of them, of course, is to step up the payments into the system a little earlier and flatten out that amortization schedule going forward so that we can manage the budget of the state. The governor has proposed nothing that would help our pension liability.
Mr. Pritzker, we got to leave it there so we can get one more question in, and it comes from Doug Wilson.
Mr. Pritzker, what should the minimum wage be in Illinois?
I believe that we need to raise the minimum wage for workers across the state. It's not right. It's not right that people are earning $8.25.
What should that wage? What do you think that wage
I want to
should be?
gradually raise the minimum wage to a living wage, to $15. That ultimately is something we can do. We can protect our small businesses. We can protect our small businesses with some tax credits along the way so that they're not harmed significantly. But look, people cannot live on $12,000 and $13,000, $14,000 a year and feed their families and send their kids to college. You can't. We need to have a fair a fair minimum wage in the state. Remember, Governor Rauner actually proposed lowering the minimum wage when he was running. I don't think that's right.
$15 an hour by when, though?
I want to raise wages across the state and stand up for collective bargaining rights and create jobs so that there's a competition for labor, because that's the best way to raise wages in our state.
But $15 an hour by when? You said gradually.
Yeah, over a number of years. Again, you've seen the proposals that are out there. The proposals that are out there have been 5- and 6-year proposals for raising the minimum wage.
Okay. Mr. Rauner.
Yes, I have for years recommended an increase in the minimum wage tied to reforms that help businesses be able to pay it. Property tax relief, workers' reform, comp reform, and regulatory relief. And we had that as part of a grand bargain that we were working on a year ago that Speaker Madigan scuttled by saying it had to be $15 an hour or nothing. He wouldn't compromise to go to $10 an hour, which would have been progress. The real answer, though, to raising wages
you had a grand
is
bargain
rapid
presented
economic growth. Rapid economic growth where companies are competing to hire workers. You know what? The states around us, the factory workers now in Wisconsin make more money than factory workers in Illinois. Factory workers in Indiana, factory workers in Michigan, Texas. They make more money than here because businesses are booming in those states. And you know what? Within a short period of time, we can do that. We have the best, hardest working people in America in Illinois, the best location, the best transportation network. We should be kicking tails. Lower the taxes, lower the regulations, stop the corruption that Mr. Pritzker's part of, and businesses will flood to the state of Illinois and we'll get higher wages.
All right, gentlemen, that is the last question, folks, that we have for tonight. We could go another hour, right? So now we want to move on, though, to some closing remarks. Mr. Pritzker, let's start with you. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. This is the most important election of our lifetime, and you have a clear choice. We can bring a new day to Illinois. Illinois is and can be so much better than it has been over the last 4 years. Whether you live here in Quincy or in Carbondale, Peoria, or Rockford, I think you want a governor who's fighting for you every day, not trying to pit one part of the state against another. In fact, we are one Illinois. So I will be a governor who wakes up every single day fighting to lower the cost of health care for you, making college more affordable, raising wages, and creating jobs. I'm J.B. Pritzker, and I intend to work with you to help put Springfield back on the side of working families. Thank you.
Governor Rauner, you have 90 seconds for a closing remark.
This is the most important election of the last 50 years. This is a key turning point in our state's history. This will determine our children and our grandchildren's future. We have a clear choice. Do we go back to the past with Mr. Pritzker and Mr. Madigan in total control, one-party rule, higher taxes, bigger spending, more job losses, more overregulation of our businesses, and a center of government concentrated in Chicago that doesn't care about Central Illinois or Western Illinois or Southern Illinois? We have that choice with Mr. Pritzker going back to the past with a person who's been caught by a Democrat inspector general in Chicago committing tax fraud, mail fraud, and perjury, who has been caught on FBI wiretap trying to buy political office from Rod Blagojevich, who has been caught hiding his money in offshore bank accounts so he doesn't even pay the proper income taxes on inherited billions of dollars, and who uses the language of racist. He doesn't care about others. He manipulates the system for his own benefit. We can't go there. We deserve better. I've worked hard for 4 years. We've made progress on jobs, education, health care, and transforming the state. We've got a long way to go, but we can't give up. We can't give up. If we keep working, we'll get term limits. We'll get lower property taxes. We'll get more jobs. We'll become the greatest state in the greatest nation on earth when we have an honest government that works for the people again instead of the corrupt insiders. Let's never give up. Let's create a better future together.
Gentlemen, thank you both so much. Gentlemen, thank you.